What happens when two of music's biggest stars clash over a deeply personal topic that hits too close to home? What you're about to witness is one of the most emotionally charged moments in daytime television history, where a simple interview question spiraled into something neither Tim McGraw nor Kelly Clarkson saw coming. This conversation will leave you speechless, so make sure to subscribe and drop a comment below with your thoughts on what unfolds here. Kelly Clarkson sat across from Tim McGraw in her brightly lit studio, her usual warm smile lighting up the space as the cameras rolled. The country superstar looked comfortable in the guest chair, his signature cowboy hat resting on the side table, black button-down shirt, crisp and professional. What started as a typical promotional interview for his latest album was about to take a turn that would leave both artists exposed in ways neither anticipated. "So Tim, your new album really digs deep into themes of family and legacy," Kelly began, her voice carrying that familiar mix of curiosity and warmth that had made her talk show such a success. "There's this recurring theme about fathers and the impact they have on their children. Tell me, what inspired you to explore that so deeply this time around?" Tim shifted slightly in his chair, his weathered hands clasping together. "Well, Kelly, you know, becoming a father changes everything. When you hold that baby for the first time, you realize you're not just responsible for feeding them and keeping them safe. You're shaping who they become. Every word, every action, it all matters." Kelly nodded, her expression growing more thoughtful. "That's beautiful, and I think so many parents can relate to that feeling. But I'm curious, and forgive me if this is too personal, but you've been very open about your own father's absence when you were growing up. How did that experience shape the kind of father you wanted to be?" The question hung in the air for a moment, and Tim's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "My father, he had his demons, Kelly. Baseball was his life, and when that dream died, I think part of him died with it. He wasn't around much, and when he wasn't really present. You know, I learned early on that I didn't want to be that kind of man." Kelly leaned forward slightly, her interviewer instincts sensing there was more to unpack. "That must have been incredibly difficult for you as a child. Do you think that absence, that pain, is what drives you to be so present with your own daughters?" Tim's eyes grew distant, and when he spoke again, his voice carried a weight that hadn't been there moments before. "Every day, Kelly, every single day, I make a choice to show up, because I know what it feels like when someone doesn't. I know what it's like to wonder if you're worth staying for." The studio fell unusually quiet, the only sound the soft hum of the cameras. Kelly's expression softened, and for a moment, the professional interviewer facade slipped away, revealing something more vulnerable underneath. "I understand that feeling more than you might think," Kelly said quietly. "The wondering, the questioning, your own worth based on someone else's inability to stay." Tim looked at her with genuine surprise. "Your father?" Kelly nodded, her voice becoming softer. "He left when I was 6. Just gone one day. My mom did everything she could to fill that void, but there's something about a father's absence that leaves a specific kind of hole, isn't there?" "There is," Tim agreed, his voice carrying newfound respect. "It's like you're always trying to prove you're worthy of love, even when you know logically that their leaving had nothing to do with you." Kelly's eyes glistened slightly, but she maintained her composure. "Exactly. And the thing is, I thought I'd worked through all of that. Years of therapy, success, finding love, having my own children. But then there are moments, unexpected moments, where that little girl who felt abandoned just surfaces again." Tim studied her face carefully. "What kind of moments?" Kelly hesitated, glancing briefly at the cameras before continuing. "When my divorce was finalized, when I was fighting for custody, when I had to explain to my kids why their family was changing. Suddenly, I was that 6-year-old again, wondering if I was somehow responsible for people leaving. But you weren't," Tim said firmly. "And neither was I. We were children, Kelly. Children don't have that kind of power over adults' choices." Kelly smiled sadly. "I know that up here," she said, tapping her temple. "But knowing it and feeling it are two different things, aren't they?" Tim leaned back in his chair, his expression growing more contemplative. "They are confident, and I think that's why this album was so important for me to make. I needed to explore those feelings, to understand how my father's choices affected me, but also how they shaped me into the man I am today." "That's incredibly brave," Kelly said. "Not everyone is willing to examine those wounds so publicly." "Well, music has always been my therapy," Tim replied with a slight smile. "And if sharing my story helps someone else feel less alone in their pain, then it's worth the vulnerability." Kelly paused, seeming to wrestle with something internally. "Can I ask you something that might be difficult to answer?" Tim nodded. "Of course. Do you ever wonder if your father regrets his choices, if he thinks about what he missed?" Tim's expression grew pained. "Every day, especially now that he's gone. I'll never get to ask him why he couldn't stay, why baseball mattered more than his family. I'll never get to hear him say he was sorry, or that he was proud of who I became despite his absence." Kelly's voice was barely above a whisper. "That's the hardest part, isn't it? The questions that will never have answers." "It is," Tim agreed. But I've learned that sometimes you have to create your own closure. You have to forgive them, not for their sake, but for yours. Because carrying that anger, that hurt, it only hurts you in the end. Kelly's eyes filled with tears that she tried to blink away. I'm still working on that part. The forgiveness. Tim's voice grew gentle. It's not a destination, Kelly, it's a journey. Some days you feel like you've made peace with it all, and other days the anger comes back fresh as ever. That's okay. That's human. The cameras continued to roll as both artists sat in the weight of their shared vulnerability, neither quite prepared for how deeply this conversation would cut. Tim watched as Kelly wiped discreetly at her eyes, and something shifted in his demeanor. Where there had been understanding moments before, a different energy began to emerge. You know what, Kelly? I have to be honest with you about something. Kelly looked up, surprised by the change in his tone. What do you mean? I've been watching your show for a while now, and I've noticed something. You talk about your father's abandonment a lot. In interviews, in your music, even in casual conversations with guests. And I wonder if maybe you're using that pain as a crutch. Kelly's face went pale. I'm sorry. What? Tim continued, his voice taking on a harder edge. I mean, at what point do you stop being a victim of your childhood and start taking responsibility for your own life? I dealt with my father's absence and moved on. I didn't let it define every relationship I had afterward. Kelly's mouth opened in shock. Tim, I don't think that's fair. Everyone processes trauma differently, do they? Tim challenged. Or do some people just choose to stay stuck in it? Because from where I'm sitting, it seems like you've built your entire identity around being the girl whose daddy left. Your music, your interviews, even your divorce. You always circle back to that same story. Kelly's voice began to tremble with a mixture of hurt and anger. That's not true. My divorce had nothing to do with my father, didn't it? Tim pressed. You married someone who was emotionally unavailable, just like your father. And when it didn't work out, instead of looking at your own patterns, you blamed it on your childhood trauma. That's convenient, isn't it? Kelly stood up abruptly, her hands shaking. I can't believe you're saying this to me. You don't know anything about my marriage or my choices. Tim remained seated, his expression unmoved. I know enough. I know you've been married and divorced, and now you're a single mother doing exactly what you said you never wanted to do, raising kids without their father consistently present. Sound familiar? Kelly's eyes filled with tears of fury. How dare you compare my situation to my childhood? I didn't choose for my marriage to end. I didn't choose for my ex-husband to be difficult about custody. But you chose him, Tim said, coldly. You chose to marry someone who couldn't give you what you needed. And now you're making the same choices your father made, putting your career first, keeping your kids in the spotlight, moving them around for your convenience. Kelly's voice cracked. That's not what I'm doing. Everything I do is for my children. Is it? Tim's tone was relentless now. Or is it for your image? The strong single mom who overcame abandonment. Because that's a pretty marketable story, isn't it, Kelly? It sells records. It gets sympathy votes on singing competitions. It makes people root for you. Kelly was crying openly now, her professional composure completely shattered. Stop it. Just stop. But Tim didn't stop. You know what the difference is between you and me? When my father left, I didn't spend the next 30 years talking about it. I didn't write songs about it. I didn't use it as an excuse for every failed relationship or poor decision I made. I grew up and moved on. That's not fair, Kelly sobbed. You don't get to tell me how to process my trauma, and you don't get to use your trauma as a get-out-of-jail-free card for every mistake you make. Tim shot back. At some point, you have to own your choices. Kelly, you have to stop being a victim and start being accountable. Kelly wiped her face with the back of her hand, her voice barely a whisper. I thought you understood. I did understand, Tim replied, but understanding and enabling are two different things. Sometimes caring about someone means telling them the truth they don't want to hear. What truth? Kelly demanded, her voice rising again. That you're not special because your father left. That happens to millions of kids, and most of them don't spend their entire adult lives defining themselves by it. You've turned your abandonment into your brand, and it's pathetic. Kelly recoiled as if she'd been slapped. Pathetic. Yes, pathetic. You're a grown woman with incredible talent, success, and resources. You have two beautiful children who need you to be strong, not constantly rehashing your daddy issues on national television. They deserve better than a mother who's still stuck in her 6-year-old trauma. Kelly's tears were flowing freely now, her voice breaking. You don't know what you're talking about. You don't know how hard I've worked to be a good mother, do I? Tim's voice was brutal in its honesty. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're repeating the same patterns. Your kids are going to grow up with a mother who was physically present but emotionally unavailable because she was too busy being a victim to actually heal. Kelly put her hand to her chest, struggling to breathe. I can't do this. Can't do what? Can't handle the truth. Tim's voice was unforgiving. This is exactly what I'm talking about. The moment someone challenges your narrative, you fall apart. How are you supposed to teach your children resilience when you've never learned it yourself? Kelly shook her head violently. No, no, this isn't right. This isn't who you are. The Tim McGraw I know wouldn't be this cruel. The Tim McGraw you know is a carefully constructed public image, Tim replied, but the real Tim McGraw believes in tough love. My father may have been absent, but I learned to be a man without him. I learned to be strong without using his absence as a crutch. That's the difference between us. Kelly's breathing was becoming labored, her panic evident. I need you to stop talking, please. Why? Because it's uncomfortable. Because it's making you face something you don't want to face. Tim's voice was cold now. This is your show, Kelly. You ask the tough questions. You push your guests to be vulnerable, but you can't handle it when someone does the same to you. Kelly looked around desperately, as if searching for an escape route. This wasn't supposed to happen. This was supposed to be about your album. My album is about growth, about moving past childhood trauma and becoming the person you're meant to be, Tim said. Maybe that's exactly what this conversation needs to be about too. Kelly's voice was barely audible. I thought we were connecting. I thought you understood me. I did understand you, Tim replied. That's why I'm telling you this. Because I see what you're doing to yourself, and I see what you're doing to your children, and someone needs to care enough about you to tell you the truth, even if it hurts. Kelly stood there trembling, tears streaming down her face, and for a moment the studio was filled with nothing but the sound of her ragged breathing. When she finally spoke, her voice was raw but steady. You know what, Tim? You're right about one thing. I do talk about my father a lot, but you're wrong about everything else. Tim raised an eyebrow, clearly not expecting her to fight back. Am I? Yes, you are, Kelly said, wiping her face with determination. You think I use my trauma as a crutch, but what you don't understand is that I talk about it because there are millions of people out there who feel exactly like I do, who think they're broken because someone they loved abandoned them. Kelly, that's not the point I was making. Tim tried to interrupt. No, let me finish, Kelly said firmly, her voice growing stronger. You said I'm pathetic for not getting over it, but you know what's actually pathetic? A man who thinks strength means burying your pain so deep that you can't even acknowledge it exists. Tim's expression shifted, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his features. That's not what I do, isn't it? Kelly challenged. You just spent 20 minutes telling me I should stop talking about my father, but you've written an entire album about yours. You've done interviews about him, you've shared your story, but somehow when I do it, it's weakness. Tim opened his mouth to respond, but Kelly didn't give him the chance. And you want to talk about my children? Kelly's voice was fierce now. My kids know they're loved every single day. They know their mother fights for them, advocates for them, and, yes, sometimes cries in front of them because that's what real people do. That's what honest people do. Kelly, I didn't mean to suggest, Tim started, but she cut him off again. You didn't mean to suggest what? That I'm a bad mother. That I'm damaging my children by being open about my struggles. Because that's exactly what you said, and it's the cruelest thing anyone has ever said to me. Tim's confidence was visibly shaken now. I was trying to help you see something. Help me see what? Kelly demanded. That I should be ashamed of my pain. That I should pretend everything is fine when it's not. That I should lie to my children about the reality of life and relationships. No, that's not what I meant, Tim said quietly. Then what did you mean? Kelly's voice was breaking again, but this time with frustrated anger rather than hurt. Because what I heard was a man who's so terrified of his own emotions that he is to attack someone else for having the courage to feel them. Tim sat back in his chair, looking genuinely stunned. That's not fair. Fair, Kelly laughed bitterly. You just told me I'm pathetic, that I'm a bad mother, that I'm using my trauma for marketing purposes, and you want to talk about fair. I said those things because, Tim struggled to find his words, because I see myself in you, Kelly. I see that pain, and it scares me. Kelly stared at him, her chest still heaving. What? I see that pain, and it reminds me of how I felt when I was younger, how lost I was, how angry I was. And I guess I thought if I could convince you to just move past it, maybe I could convince myself that I really have to. The admission hung in the air between them, and Kelly's expression began to soften slightly. Tim, what are you saying? I'm saying that maybe I haven't moved past it as much as I thought I had, Tim said, his voice barely above a whisper. Maybe. I've just gotten really good at pretending it doesn't hurt anymore. Kelly slowly sat back down, her anger giving way to something more complex. So you attacked me because you're not as healed as you want everyone to think. Tim looked down at his hands. I attacked you because seeing your pain reminded me of my own, and I couldn't handle it. I thought if I could make you stop talking about it, if I could make you get over it, then maybe I wouldn't have to face the fact that I'm still that little boy wondering why his father couldn't love him enough to stay. Kelly's voice was soft. Now Tim, that's not how healing works. I know that, Tim said, finally meeting her eyes. I know that now, but for a minute there, I thought if I could just be harsh enough, tough enough, maybe I could shock you into being the person I wish I could be. What person is that? Kelly asked gently. Someone who doesn't still wake up some mornings feeling like that abandoned kid, Tim admitted. Someone who doesn't still question whether they're worthy of love, even after 30 years of marriage and success. Kelly reached across the space between them and touched his hand. Tim, you just described exactly how I feel. That's why I talk about it. Not because I want to stay stuck, but because I want other people to know they're not alone in feeling stuck sometimes. Tim looked at their joined hands, his voice thick with emotion. I'm so sorry, Kelly. Everything I said to you, it was wrong. It was cruel. It was my own fear talking, not any kind of wisdom. I know, Kelly said quietly, and I'm sorry too. What could you possibly be sorry for? Tim asked, confusion in his voice. For triggering something in you that you weren't ready to face, Kelly replied. For making you feel like you had to defend yourself against feelings you thought you'd conquered. Tim shook his head. That's not your fault. That's not anyone's fault except mine. I should have been honest about where I was coming from instead of attacking you. Kelly squeezed his hand gently. We're both just trying to figure it out, aren't we? How to be whole people despite the pieces that were broken when we were too young to protect ourselves. Yeah, Tim said, his voice cracking slightly. Yeah, we are. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of their shared vulnerability settling between them. Finally, Kelly spoke again. You know what I think, she said. What? I think maybe the reason we both ended up as performers, as people who share our stories publicly, is because we're still trying to prove we're worth staying for. We're still trying to earn the love we didn't get when we needed it most. Tim nodded slowly. That's probably true. And maybe that's okay. Maybe that's not something to be ashamed of. Maybe it's not, Kelly agreed. Maybe it's just part of who we are, and instead of fighting it or judging it, we just accept it and try to use it to help other people feel less alone. Tim looked up at her with genuine respect. You're a lot stronger than I gave you credit for. No, Kelly said with a small smile. I'm exactly as strong as you gave me credit for. You just forgot that strength doesn't mean you never break. It means you keep going even when you do. Tim squeezed her hand back. I'll remember that. Good, Kelly said. Because I have a feeling we're both going to need to remember it. As the cameras continued to roll, both artists sat in the aftermath of their emotional battle, forever changed by the honesty they'd been forced to share. The conversation that had begun as a simple interview about an album had become something much more profound, a raw examination of how childhood wounds shape adult lives, and how sometimes the people who trigger our deepest pain are the ones who can help us understand it best. The silence stretched between them, comfortable now in its weight, as both Tim McGraw and Kelly Clarkson realized that healing isn't about getting over the past, but about learning to carry it with grace. What did you think about this incredibly raw conversation between two music legends? Did Tim cross a line with his brutal honesty, or did Kelly needed to hear those difficult truths? Drop your thoughts in the comments below and make sure to subscribe for more unfiltered moments like this one.